Night of the Spadefoot Toads, Chapter 2. Geography is the last class of the day. Ben stares out of the classroom window at the rain beating against the glass. He can hear it on the roof, too, and see it making the puddles on the playground dance. It's rained or snowed or sleeted just about every day since he moved to Massachusetts. Mrs. Kutcher holds up a sheet of paper. "This is the most important project of the year," she says. "We've been studying different ecosystems and biomes all year, and now you get to choose your favorite one. You'll need to use your reading and writing and research skills and everything that you've learned about different ecosystems. You'll have 2 months to do it, but you should start working on it now. A project this big can't be done at the last minute." Mrs. Kutcher gives the first person in each row a stack of information pages to pass back. Ben stares at Jenny's long black hair while he waits. It's always straight and neat, like she brushes it 1,000 times every morning. Jenny takes a sheet and then turns to hand the stack to Ben with a smile. She has a gap between her front 2 teeth that makes her smile relaxed and friendly, which seems different from her neat combed hair. Jenny turns back and picks up the book she was reading. She's a book sponge. Some kids read 1 book every 2 weeks. She reads one every other day. In fact, she reads so much that she gets in trouble for it, which seems pretty funny to Ben. Teachers are always telling you how important reading is, and then when you actually read a lot, you get in trouble for it. But Jenny's head is always buried in a book, and it's usually a book that doesn't have anything to do with what we're studying. Mrs. Kutcher almost always has a book on her desk that she's taken away from Jenny during health or geography or even reading. Jenny is smart in a very weird way, not in the way of always doing exactly the right thing in school. She's smart in seeing the world in ways others don't. Like she has her head tilted to one side a little and looks at the world from a different angle. Jenny turns back to Ben again, still wearing her gap-toothed grin. "What did Mrs. Tibbet say to you?" she whispers. Ben shrugs. "Did you get in trouble?" Ben shakes his head. "I don't think so. It seemed like she was mad, but then she didn't do anything. She told me not to touch the mice." "I wonder what she uses them for. My brother—" "Excuse me, Jenny," Mrs. Kutcher interrupts their conversation. "Could you please turn around and pay attention? I'm not just talking to hear my own voice." Jenny gives Ben another quick smile and turns around. Ben feels his face turn red. He looks at the assignment sheet. Geography project, exploring world ecosystems. Your major report for the spring will be on an ecosystem anywhere in the world. In the report, you should explain the following: what and where the ecosystem is, what the climate is like, which plants and animals are part of it, how it fits in with other ecosystems of the world. Please also discuss what makes the ecosystem a unique place and what threatens it. The report should be 3 to 5 pages in length. Please include artwork, charts, or models that will help us understand the special nature of your habitat. You may choose your own topic or ask me for help in selecting one. The project is due Friday, June 5th. Ben knows right away what topic he wants to do. Other kids are looking at their papers and some are already waving their hands in the air. "Mrs. Kutcher, can I do the rainforest in Costa Rica?" Jenny asks. Teacher nods. "That's what I wanted to do," someone whines about, waiting to be called on. 3 or 4 other kids join in, like the rainforest is the only interesting place in the world. Frankie Murley shouts out, "I want the beach where I can see bikinis." His buddies break out laughing. Mrs. Kutcher shoots Frankie a look, but doesn't even seem to care. He's scored points with his friends. Ben isn't interested in the rainforest or the beach. He shoots his hand up in the air, and Mrs. Kutcher calls on him. "Can I do the desert?" he asks. "The Sonoran Desert in Arizona." "Sure," says Mrs. Kutcher. "You must know a lot about that already." Ben nods. "Who ever heard of a snoring desert?" Frankie shouts, and the same crew of boys snickered. "Sonorian," Ben pronounces the word slowly. "It's the name of the desert around where I lived in Tucson." Sonoring, Frankie sneers. Whatever, it's all he ever talks about. Who cares about Tucson anyways? Ben pretends he doesn't hear. Jenny looks back at Ben and rolls her eyes. He shrugs. He wonders if it's true. Is it all he talks about? Maybe so, he thinks. And it's no wonder. Tucson was sure better than here, especially with kids like Frankie around. Finally, he sneaks a glance at Frankie, who's smirking at his friends. Tommy Miller reaches across the aisle and gives him a high five. Jenny mouthed these words to Ben. "He's an idiot." Mrs. Kutcher raises her voice, trying to get the class back on track. That's enough for now. I'll have a little conference with each of you to find out what you'd like to do. I have a list of ecosystems, and I'm sure each of you can find an interesting one that no one else is doing. She looks at the clock and says, Okay, class, pack your things. It's nearly time to go. All the way to the snoring desert, Frankie taunts. You can't win with Frankie, and Ben knows it. He keeps his mouth shut and concentrates on stuffing his notebooks and books in his backpack. By the time Ben gets on the bus, most of the seats are taken. All the 5th graders are in the back of the bus where they always sit. Ryan's back there too, and he calls to him, but Ben chooses a seat halfway back with a 3rd grader he doesn't know. Ben's sister Agatha is on the bus too. She's sitting in the front row with Rory, Ryan's sister, and they're both in the 2nd grade. Agatha and Rory are laughing and talking with the kids in the seat behind them as the bus pulls out of the school circle, and Ben wonders why it's so easy for his sister to make friends. It's like she'd lived in Edenborough forever. Maybe it's because she talks so much. Ben looks out the window. He doesn't see that much point in talking unless it's about something important. About the 3rd stop on the route, Ryan lurches down the aisle. When he gets to Ben's seat, he peers down at him with his good eye. See you tomorrow, Ben. Ben nods, then quickly looks out the window again. Then Ben hears Frankie's voice. Arr, Captain Kidd, Captain Kidd. Goodbye, Captain Kidd. Ben can't help looking back. Frankie's got a hand over one eye like it's a patch. A couple of other boys are laughing. Ben turns in time to see Ryan getting off the bus. His head is down and his ears are bright red. Frankie and his buddies are always ragging on one of the 4th graders. When the bus comes to a stop at the end of Ben's street, he steps out of the door into the drizzling rain. Agatha is waiting for him at the bottom of the stairs. Come on, Ben, let's run. I'm not running. You can if you want to. But Mom said we have to walk together, Agatha says in a whiny little sister voice she was born with. Then we can walk, Ben answers. But we'll get wet. Agatha, go ahead and run if you want to. I'm walking. Poophead, his sister says. She whirls around and takes off down the street. Ben holds his backpack on top of his head to keep the rain off and plods towards his house. The entire sky is gray, and some of the puddles on the street are deep. His feet get wet, even though he's watching where he's stepping. The grass in the yards is beginning to turn green again, but there are no leaves on the trees yet. He peers up from under his backpack. The tree branches hang over the street. There are tons more trees than in Arizona. He tries to imagine all the branches filled with leaves. Ben cuts across a yard to avoid a big puddle on the sidewalk. The ground is like a soaked sponge. The water wells up around his shoes. The smell of the wet earth fills the heavy air. He's never seen this much water lying around before. The desert has gentle rains in the winter and hard, huge thunderstorms in the summer, but the rain soaks into the dry earth or runs off in a matter of hours. It never stays around for too long. Ben used to love the big thunderstorms. He could always smell them coming. The wind whipped up in front of them as the storm rolled across the desert floor, and the clouds rose higher and higher in the sky. Out there, everything races and crashes and breathes like it's a living thing, he says. Here in Massachusetts, the rain just goes on and on. Nothing very exciting about that. Thinking about the thunderstorms reminds Ben of the things from his bedroom that got lost in the move. He had collected most of them himself, but some of the best stuff came from the Desert Museum. Mr. Thompson had given him a rabbit skull and a fossil of a trilobite, a sea creature from millions of years ago. But his favorite thing was the shed skin from a king snake. Ben had watched the snake in the display case at the museum for over an hour while it wriggled out of its old skin and left it behind. Its head and body emerged with new skin that was bright and shiny and vibrant. It was one of the most amazing things Ben had ever seen. Mr. Thompson gave him the dried, old, crinkly skin that stretched out even longer than the 3-foot snake itself. But it wasn't just the displays and the creatures in the museum that made it so great. Even better were all the things that he learned about the desert. And the more he knew, the more he wanted to know. Every time he went to the museum, he peppered Mr. Thompson and the other guides with 1,000 questions. Ben, his mother had said, you'll drive them crazy. But Mr. Thompson and the others seemed happy to share what they knew. That's what we're here for, the old man had said. The guides taught Ben to be watchful and patient when he was outside. Nature shows itself when you give it time. There are a lot of critters out there, Mr. Thompson had said, and you'll see them if you know how to be still and wait. Ben had learned how to be patient. In Arizona, he'd grab a snack after school and then walk down to the river wash at the end of their street. There were new houses going up, but behind them there was just open space, the desert stretching out and up into the foothills of the mountains west of the Tucson. After the area's big thunderstorms, the river ran through the wash, creating a lush place for trees and plants that wouldn't last a week in the dry ground 100 yards away. Ben had a favorite waiting place in the river wash, a big rock in the shade of a cottonwood tree. He would sit there, not moving at all, and after a while he'd always see something. Mice were regulars, and ground squirrels and lizards. Sometimes he saw javelinas, small wild pigs, snorting and scurrying from one bush to another. And on a few lucky occasions he saw snakes. The more he watched and waited, the more animals he saw and learned to identify. One Saturday when he was home, he heard his mother give a little yelp as she walked into the laundry room. Ben ran to see what was wrong. "It's a frog," she said, pointing in the corner. Ben looked closely. "No, Mom, it's a toad," he said. "It's a Colorado River toad." "I don't care what it is," his mother said. "I don't want it anywhere near my washing machine." The large squat toad sat in the corner looking perfectly happy to be there. "He won't hurt anything," Ben said. "He'll eat the spiders." Ben talked his parents into leaving the toad there for several days. He was happy, and so was the toad, but his mom wasn't. Ben finally carefully scooped it into a box, took it back down to the river wash, and let it go. "Ben's toad removal," his father had quipped. In Arizona, Ben spent as much time outside as he could. Most of the kids from school were busy doing other things, either playing sports or staying inside with their computers and TVs. But Ben didn't really like team sports, although he was big for his age, and people wanted him on their team. And he couldn't stand spending too much time inside. It made him feel like he was wasting the day, wasting sun. He liked being outside by himself or with someone who liked the outdoors as much as he did. Toby was the only other kid he knew who was happy spending the day exploring the nearby desert. Ben and Toby had started a collection of things they'd found. They got a terrarium and put things in it and named it Desert World. They filled the bottom with sand and some rocks, then planted a few small cactuses and turned it into a sort of an ant farm. A stink bug farm, actually. Ben loved catching stink bugs, funny little critters that lifted their back ends high in the air when they thought they were being attacked. But the main inhabitant of the desert world was Lenny, a western banded gecko. Toby and Ben had spent hours watching the small, quick lizard as it scurried around in its little home, dining on the stink bugs and grasshoppers they fed it. But Ben had to leave that all behind in Tucson. Now Toby was caring for Lenny and everything else in the desert world. Maybe, Ben thinks, the moving people have found the box and I'll get my collection of rocks and bugs back, and my books and posters.